Hello everybody, welcome back to the channel. My name is Rob and today we are going to be painting some Horus Heresy Myrmidons. So we are back with another tutorial. It's another Horus Heresy tutorial. Really excited about this one. So this is going to be the expansion of my force. A big thank you to Crusader Games for providing me with the models. Really appreciate it. They did take a long time to paint, probably about 2 days I think in total. So what you guys are seeing is kind of like 2 days worth of work, but they are gorgeous models. Haven't seen a whole lot of the new models kind of like around on Instagram, but hopefully this will give you a good idea. So big thank you to those guys for sending them to me. We're going to go through a fair few kind of techniques, bits and pieces with these models today, particularly about the robes and how we're going to kind of like edge highlight the robes. So if you've seen my Thanatar tutorial, this is kind of like a natural progression, a natural step from there. In terms of the airbrush today, we're going to be using a Iwata HPC Plus, which is often my go-to airbrush. I think I probably use this about 80% of the time. These were sent to me by Iwata themselves, which is absolutely awesome, so big thank you to those guys. But this is, I have a number of this airbrush that I have bought myself, so it gets my seal of approval. I think that that it straddles that kind of like fine and medium. You can do very precise work that you would need for kind of all kinds of kind of like Space Marines and Mechanicum and Eldari and all those sorts of things, but also it's great at base coating as well. So it's an airbrush which is kind of does a little bit of everything, as we shall see within this tutorial. So in terms of the first steps, I've primed everything black. I have magnetized the weapons. If you're a Myrmidon or Mechanicum aficionado, you will be able to magnetize the weapons, but it is not easy because you need to drill into the joint. I used a 2x2 magnet actually into the Myrmidon itself, and I think it was like a 3x1 magnet that I just kind of like slotted into the actual weapon. In terms of this colour that we're laying down, so this is just gunmetal. I would usually use black metal, but I have actually run out of black metal and I'm just waiting for an order to ship from the armypainter, but it won't make a whole lot of difference. Gunmetal is pretty dark for what we need today. As I say, this is going over a black primer. And we're just base coating the metals. Now, in terms of the robes, the Thanatar that I have done on Patreon, that is basically exactly the same scheme, exactly the same steps, using molten lava and then lava orange, shading with hardened leather, and then using an ink over the top of that to bring back some saturation. What I would say with these is that I chose to do the robes with the airbrush because I wanted a really smooth finish to the robes, and I knew that I was going to kind of like edge highlight them in quite a chunky way. So you have a choice, I think, when you do these models. You can either hand paint the robes and then airbrush the metallics, or you can airbrush the robes and hand paint the metallics, or vice versa, whichever way. But you can't do both. You can't airbrush both, or you can hand paint them. I think that doing it the way that I have done takes a long time to go back in and block in all the metallics. For like 6 Myrmidon models, it probably took me very carefully about 4 or 5 hours blocking them all in. So it was really time consuming, and it was the biggest part of the job. But saying that, if you're going to hand paint the robes, it's going to take you just as long to get a smooth finish on those robes. So I think you've got a choice to make if you are an airbrusher and are intending to do these with an airbrush. But yeah, just bear that one in mind. And as you can see here, the start of the process of kind of like base coating all the metallics. Now, I did airbrush them just to almost like get me started and kickstart the process. So it was a little bit more of a little bit manageable, but only fractionally. It was still a massive slog to base coat all of these with that gunmetal colour. So yeah, but I think it's a choice for you to make. I don't think there's a wrong or right choice. If you are just doing like black robes or a very dark red or dark robes, then I think it makes a lot of sense just to do airbrush all the metallics and then hand paint the robes. I think there's no problem. I think because the orange, the very bright and vibrant orange you're going for, I was left with no other choice really but to do it with the airbrush. So learn from me, as I say, about 5 hours to base coat all these metallics very, very carefully, and there was no room for mistakes either because the orange would show up the mistakes. So once they are all base coated, you can pick out a few kind of like wires and tubes, I guess, particularly those that have been that are ribbed. I think are quite good just to paint black. I do some kind of like teal tubing a little bit later, but I think just to break up the silver, just making a few of these black I think is quite good. But we're base coating them a matte white, and then afterwards we are going to be using Grim Black speed paint. So Grim Black speed paint straight over the white areas after they've dried. And if you want to further highlight these with a lighter grey, then you can. I'd recommend uniform grey as like a next step highlight if you want to just do a little bit of edge highlighting here and there on the tubing. But as I say, you don't need to do this at all. Just for me, it just breaks it up, breaks up that kind of like silver. But if you are trying to save time, then you can totally skip this step, or just fake it, or make these tubes a different color, right? You could make them yellow if you wanted to. You could make them like a teal color, which I think works quite nice against the orange, and also kind of like links with the turquoise we're going to use a little bit later. So we are not going to be using any oils except for kind of like verdigris paints, or verdigris oils a little bit later. In terms of washing the metallics, this is slightly different from the Thalax or the Thanasar video that I did, where I used oils to kind of like wash the metallics. I'm actually just gonna, for this model, use strong tone mixed in with a little bit of matte varnish. So strong tone is basically just one of those catch-all kind of like tones. It's a mixture between like brown and black, you know, think of Old Devil in Mud. And the reason I've added in a little bit of matte varnishes is because the Warpaint Fanatics tones, or the washes, have a tendency to dry quite satin. And that's great because it keeps the luster of the metallics that you're washing it over. However, I wanted a matte finish to these metallics because I'm going to dry brush them silver a little bit later. So yeah, so you can add in just a little bit of matte varnish into it, and it also helps the flow a little bit as well. And then the only thing I would say is just be careful at this step. What you don't want to do is slosh on your strong tone onto those lovely robes that you've airbrushed. So be very careful and very slow with this process. Like, these took me like 2 days to do because I was being very careful just to avoid any kind of like damage or paint on the ropes. That was my #1 aim in all throughout this process here. But yeah, strong tone mixed with some matte varnish and you're on to a winner. Right, next up we're just going to use a dry brush here. And very carefully we're just going to dry brush the metallics. Now, because we don't want to get it onto the robes, it means that you're not going to be able to get every single kind of like edge on these models. Just try and get the ones that are most obvious and the ones that you can get. Okay, I think that you're not going to be able to get every edge. That's okay. We are going to matte this down eventually anyway, and also we're going to use quite a lot of like verdigris on it a little bit later. So kind of, you know, that whole vibe of it just being kind of like a worn and aged, you know, it plays into that. But yeah, just try and catch the edges where you can. And in terms of the brush I'm using, like, you know, there are obviously companies, armypainter for one, that sell specific dry brushes. I find that makeup brushes are nice and soft and quite useful, but also I don't treat my brushes particularly well. Like, just because of the job that I do, I make lots of content, I do commissions all the time, I'm painting for myself. Like, I do not, like, I abuse my brushes and do not treat them very well. So kind of, you know, getting like 15 makeup brushes that are all different sizes that I can just burn through over a month, like, that's really, really useful for me. If you are somebody who looks after and maintains those brushes, then you might invest in kind of like some proper dry brushes. Right, next up, so rather than doing the gold as the trim, which I'm sure you would kind of like typically find, I'm actually going to do the actual armor panel gold, and then the trim is going to remain silver. So all we're doing in a little bit paint by numbers here is just filling in those armor panels. Now, the armor panels, the obvious ones are on the torso, on the back plate, on the shoulder pads, but there are leg armor panels as well that you might consider doing. Now, on some of the Myrmidons I did do the leg panels, on some of them I didn't, but it's totally up to you how, you know, how far you want to go with this Emperor Gold color. All I would say is that we are going to add verdigris over the top of this. We're going to add like a patina effect over the top of this, so that might influence your decision about how much kind of Emperor Gold that you're going to be using a little bit later. But again, I think this is an important process just to break up that silver, so it's just not like a massive silver and orange or a massive silver and black or whatever kind of robe color you're deciding on doing. I think that it is integral that you break it up with some kind of color. It could be like black would look really good on this, and even then you could use like a verdigris effect and I think it would look pretty cool. So the next up, we're going to be using Satchel Brown to wash these metallic areas. This is Satchel Brown really thinned down with some speed paint medium here. We're talking like 2 parts speed paint medium to 1 part Satchel Brown, if not 3 parts. You could use, if you've got in your arsenal, dark wood. Satchel Brown, just basically a dark brown color. I probably wouldn't use something like hardened leather. It's a bit too kind of like orangey in tone, but dark wood Satchel Brown work really well. And the reason I say it doesn't really matter is because we're going to cover this in like a patina effect in a minute anyway, so kind of like the color itself doesn't matter too much, as long as it's just kind of washed and we're able to kind of like pick out those recesses with that wash. And then next up, we're going to be using Evil Chrome, and you can see me here just stippling this on as a highlight, just to give a little bit of definition back to these armor plates, because obviously they're matted right down now because we've used the speed paint over the top of them. I don't think you need to be too precise with this, and I think that some of you might kind of go, oh, that's quite a jump up from that washed Emperor Gold color up to that Evil Chrome. That's okay. Again, I cannot emphasize enough, we are going to be adding quite a lot of patina to this kind of like effect a little bit later, so don't worry too much. And speaking of patina, we're about to move on to it now. So I've got a mixture of turquoise lights here, which is by Applum 502, and then Viridian Hue. If you've ever seen any of my videos where I have used kind of like a patina effect, this is just my go-to mix, and this is, I would say, probably about 50-50. It's not too kind of like dark green, and you can see me using oil enhancer there. This is called Oil Expert Enhancing Medium, and I'm mixing that in rather than using white spirit. The reason why is that it speeds up the drying time of the oil, and I can mix it with the oil as well, so this takes like half an hour to dry, even quicker if you use like a hairdryer on it. But don't use a hairdryer on your Myrmidons, because there's so many like cables on it, you will basically melt them and they'll bend into unusual shapes. So you can see here around the edges where I think patina build-up would be on this on these kind of like panels. I'm just hitting that verdigris, the patina oils, into those areas, right? So you could slosh this all over the panel if you want to, but really I'm just focusing around the edges of the panel. If I happen to get some patina onto the silvers, it's no biggie, right? It's just, imagine like rain coming down, the patina's like washed onto those like silver areas. If you think about your bathroom taps as well, like some of you will either currently or in the past, I'm sure you've seen kind of like silver taps that have had kind of like a patina effect on them. So silvers do get kind of like this greenish kind of color on them, or they can do as well. It's not just kind of like coppers and bronzes that can get these kind of like patina effects. And then what I'm doing here is just with pure turquoise lights now, just being a little bit more careful after kind of the last layer has dried, and just at the bottom of each panel, just where I think it would be more intense with this pure turquoise light, I'm just going in with a very, very small brush just to kind of increase the intensity in certain areas. Not all over the model, just in certain areas, and again that will add to the overall effect of it being a little bit more realistic. The fact you've got kind of like 2 tones of your patina here, as I say, will make it look more realistic, which is pretty cool. And at this point I was like, yes, this is heading, although I've lost my mind, my mind had entered this new sphere, this had made a big difference. Right, onto the robes. This is the important bit, I think, and the next step on from the Thanatar video over on Patreon. So we're going to do the folds with molten lava first. Okay, so that's our first base layer. and we're just focusing on the folds here, and we're going to do big chunky highlights, right? You don't have to do this. This is just a style that I have gone for this kind of like video, and for these Myrmidons and just this army just in general. Okay, so this isn't always how I paint things, but it's just this style of army that I'm going for. So big chunky highlights with that molten lava color, and where there's a fold, focus your highlight on there. Okay, next up we are going to be using lava orange, which should not be an unfamiliar color. Again, if you kind of like following this from the Thanatar video over on Patreon, like this is a color that we've used before. Now what we're going to do here is we are going to kind of work in those bands of light, and we're going to do our first highlight with this lava orange. So it's not quite as chunky as the molten lava. You know, we're working within that band of light of that molten lava that we've created. Again, as you'd expect to see from GW, you know, you're working in smaller and smaller bands of light. But this is quite a nice step up and a nice transition for the robe colour. And again, if you're doing things like Castellax or Thanatars or Thalax, you know, this would almost be like, you could use this as a first kind of like layer if you wanted to in terms of an edge highlight. So this was also what took most of the second day, edge highlighting all these robes. This was, again, one of the things that really kind of took its time. But you can see it looks really, really nice here. And then we're going to go in with Flickering Flame, which is another kind of like couple of jumps up from that lava orange. And then we're working in a smaller band of light here. And actually we're working, yeah, not all the way up to the top of the fold. You know, we're getting a nice point on it, but again, we're working within that band of light. And again, this is a natural step up, and this is the color that I used to edge highlight the Thanatar. You know, I'm doing it more gradually in this video just because of the nature of the robes, but really if you're doing like Castellax or a Thanatar or something like that, this is really the edge highlight color that you're wanting to use here. But you can see it looks really nice at the moment. And it's really got that kind of like molten pop that I wanted to the edges, which is, yeah, really, really pleased with how it's looking. But it did take a lot of time, break this up. Like I did 6 in one go, and I would recommend doing it all in one go. But yeah, the base metals and then all these edges, whew, oh boy, it took a long old time to do. And then next up, we are going to mix in some ice yellow into that Flickering Flame, a combination of the two until you're happy, really. And then we'll do some extra kind of like kind of final kind of highlights in there, and then you can see me here just with this ice yellow, just doing kind of some final kind of like dot highlights as well. So as we move through those colors, we're working in smaller and smaller bands of light, and then finally with this ice yellow color, we're just putting in some kind of like final dots just to make the whole thing pop. And as you can see, you know, the hope is I'm going for like lava. Like again, this is a juxtaposed to the desaturated nature of my salamanders that you've seen before and that I'm working on for this particular army. So these are very, very saturated. The salamanders are desaturated, and then this is an army that's going to be fighting together on the tabletop here. But so far it's looking pretty cool. Again, just a few dot highlights here. I think I've added just a little bit of Flickering Flame into it. I think at this point I was a bit like, ooh, the ice yellow is quite strong. It's almost like a white against this. So you can add just a little bit of Flickering Flame in. And just on these dots here, on the corners, looks something like this. In terms of the tubing, I've just used some teal colours here. I've just worked my way through the army painter kind of like teals, just jumping my way up them, mixing together. And then I did think at the time that it's quite close to the verdigris colour, but actually that was okay. Like I think that actually keeping the palette relatively simple, and the only kind of other color is the blue lenses that we're using here, but having this kind of like greenish color against or blue-green color against the orange I think works really, really nicely. So yeah, use teal for the tubing. It's what I used on the Thanatar, but personally I think what looks quite good. And then you can kind of go around and highlight these, and then again work within those bands of light. And then I've just used a very dark kind of like texture paint, and then you can see me adding some liquid pigments to the bottom of this, which again should be no surprise if you're a regular viewer of my channel or you're signed up to the Patreon, because I use these an awful lot. In terms of these mixes, this is light clay and dark rust dust. Let's try and say that 5 times. Dark rust dust, and then kind of just mixing them together on the actual base. Rather than kind of like mixing the two together in one pot. I have thinned these down with some white spirits though, just to help them flow and just to make them less intense as well. And again, this whole process I was very, very, very careful not to try and touch the robes. I did want the robes to be pristine, like they were just kind of like walking out of the Triaris that I have started to paint. So yeah, so I wanted this all pretty clean. And here we go, here it is. So this is the Thanatar that I've mentioned like 100 times. And again, if you want to know more about how to achieve that orange color, I'd highly recommend the 2 videos that I've done all about that. And you can see how the Myrmidons kind of like fit in there and almost fit in seamlessly. Like the techniques or the paints are the same, but the techniques are slightly different just because by virtue of the fact that we've used robes. So we've got a soft material here, and there's no like chipping or anything like that involved. So if you're looking to like do a Magos in this scheme, this video is going to be massively useful for you, because you know the Magos is essentially the same as the Myrmidons. Like there's no differences really, and it's just the robes that kind of like the colors of the robes that we've kind of added on here. But hopefully this video has been useful for you guys, and hopefully you've enjoyed it. Again, as I say, I've not seen that many people that have painted the Myrmidons, so it was a real pleasure to kind of like paint them. They are really quite wonderful models, and I think the best models that we've seen kind of in the past 12 months for the Horus Heresy. So yeah, absolutely awesome to see. And a final thank you to you guys for watching this video, like absolutely massive that you guys came and hopefully you got all the way through and have enjoyed it and learned a few things. And a big thank you to the Army Painter for helping me with these videos, providing all the paints and being so supportive. And a big thank you to Crusader Games. I can't emphasize enough, they like started a partnership with those guys at the beginning of this year, and it's been great working with them, like you know, sending me stuff so I can make YouTube videos, right, for you guys, which is absolutely awesome. And a big final thank you, big hugs and kisses to all of my awesome Patreons who have again allowed me over the past year to just create more content for you guys, like, which has just been absolutely awesome. So big thank you. Thanks for the support. Make sure you go check it out. It's $3.99 a month, that's it, like for multiple tutorials and a whole backlog as well. So take care guys, and I'll see you on the next one.